Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this narration of the web novel Burning Stars, Falling Skies, taken from both HFY and Royal Road. The link to the original will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. And if you do, please subscribe, like, and comment so that the great algorithm and all its wisdom decides to help grow this channel. Chapter 10. Industry. A decade changed the face of the planet measurably. Thirg sat on the roof of a 2-story brick house, sunning herself. By now, rather than towering over the entirety of Lament, it was a truly modest residence. Despite her daughter's insistence, she refused to move into another building. Bakai, Katosh, Darlas, and Pankrat had all personally labored with her to build her home in the first year together, and that meant more to her than any ostentatious show of wealth. Queen Thirg, a voice respectively called from the promenade below. Yes, Barwell, she replied, stirring from her rest. Barwell was one of Katosh's daughters, and helped her with her day-to-day tasks as a sort of cross between an aide-de-camp and a bodyguard. She was almost 50% larger than Thirg and extremely skilled in both pistol and cutlass. According to Katosh, the application process to work as Thirg's assistant was brutal. All of the applicants were forced to go through a battery of combat, etiquette, and management tests until only 3 remained. Barwell and her 2 associates, Lindash and Istal, were all the graduates of the elite Special Forces Academy that Katosh had set up in Oasis. Thirg had seen them in firing range and sparring on the gym mats. She believed their accolades. Even back in her glory days, when she had led the conquest of the surrounding tribes, any one of them could have easily wiped the floor with her in under a minute. An hour has passed, my queen, Barwell answered. You said you wanted to tour the new factories after your nap and asked that I wake you. Thank you, Barwell. Thirg stood up, shaking the sleep from her limbs. I'll be down shortly. Please let the others know that I'll be ready to leave on time. She walked down the ramp to the 2nd story of her house. On the table next to the crude personal computer that was Bakai's last birthday gift to Thirg sat her bag. Some DrakeBear wore clothing like the humans, but that had never made sense to her. Maybe in regions with inclement weather. But this close to the Great Desert, clothes were a luxury. The bag, a simple leather affair that hung over her shoulder, was her one nod to humanity efficiency. Maybe it was just because she remembered her first days near the swamp, carrying wet clay by Grasper to make the bricks for the first house. But she refused to leave her home without it. Thirg exited her house in just under a minute, much to her guard's chagrin. She still refused to wear any sort of armor or protective gear. They constantly lectured Thirg on her safety, but she hardly saw what there was to fear. DrakeBear society was consumed with a sense of purpose. Everyone knew their place and what needed to be done to fulfill their destiny to seize the stars from the invaders. Her people saw her both as a leader and a living symbol of that purpose. Harming her would run completely counter to what their whole notion stood for. As far as she was concerned, the guards were mostly there to keep adoring fans away from her while she performed her vital duties. Barwell led the way to her residence's gate, an imposing edifice of stone lined with steel spikes built into a roughly 20-foot wall surrounding her home and the nearby gardens. She didn't know the names of all the guards that patrolled that wall, only Barwell, Istal, and Lindash, who were actually allowed to approach within 100 feet of her house. But Thirg knew that there were at least 10 to 15 on duty at any given point in time. She kept telling Katosh that she was overreacting, but her daughter would hear none of it. The rest of the sisters agreed, and even though Thirg had the power to override their decision, she didn't. She just couldn't bring herself to force the issue when her daughters fussed over her like this. Ishtal and Lindash fell on either side of her, forming a triangle with Bawal at the point. Bordering her house, only a short walk away, stood the Capitol building, a 4-story complex with 3 wings made from beautiful rose-veined marble. Thridak still preferred the old amphitheater of governance. There was something intimate about the meeting where the 4 closest daughters under the torchlight, what the rest of the lament watched on, that the true current system of bureaucrats and ministers lacked. They would still meet quarterly or in emergencies to make truly important decisions, but for the last 3 years the meetings had been televised. Even if she got to see all her daughters in person, it lacked the splendor of the meeting under the torchlight and open stars. Plus, Thridak hated the way the television makeup made her scales look. She always ended up blotchy and off-color, even if no one would dare say that to her face. She kept walking past the Capitol. It was almost the second home, given how much time she spent working there. Her office even had a sleeping couch for when she spent long nights going over the reports from all over the Empire. She snorted. Empire really was only a word for it, as for the last year there were over 40 regional cities and 3 million Dutch Tal under her banner. Truly a testament to their farming techniques and their species' potential for logarithmic growth. The entourage arrived at the large government ground car park outside the capital, and after a brief search by Lindish for explosives, they piled in. More tank than car. It was almost 15 feet long and 11 wide, with plenty of room for the 4 or 5 Dutch Tal to relax inside, especially with the Ishtal driving the chamber and the Lindash manning the vehicle's order-loading cannon. Bawal rode in the interior with her, discussing the figures on the new strain of heartland that their scientists were trying to engineer during the ride to their destination. Finally, after almost 45 minutes of weaving the car through the well-wishes and laments' interminable sprawl, they arrived at the new factory, located at the edge of the town and powered by a combination of hydraulic and solar power. It was Bakai's current pet project. Once it was running at full capacity, it would be able to produce solar panels, the batteries used by Dutch Tal in everyday life, and vehicles, according to Bakai. It would be capable of churning out 10 tractors or 20 ground cars per day. Bakai was proud of the designs, entirely electric and packed with capacitors. The ground cars would be able to run for almost 2 hours at a time without recharging, but that was more than enough to get anywhere in Lament, let alone another smaller city. Once the factory was open, the ground cars began shipping out to the far-flung cities of the Empire. Dutch Tal society would take on an important step towards modernity, while avoiding the nasty period of fossil fuel dependency that plagued humanity. Thridak and all of her daughters agreed. None of them wanted to recreate the periods of expansion and turmoil that racked Earth in their futile attempt to claim more and more of its dwindling natural resources. After all, who would want to suffer through 4 world wars and 6 cold wars to clean power was so close at hand? It was all a stopgap anyway. Bakai was only 1 or 2 generations of tools and equipment away from developing the house-sized fusion reactors that finally freed humanity from dependency on oil and coal. Cold fusion was fairly simple anyway. It really was a wonder that humanity wallowed around for centuries fighting over fossil fuels when they just could have focused on a way to manipulate hydrogen atoms and solved everything. Bawal led the way out of the ground car, clearing the factory parking lot of adoring Dutch Tal. It really was a shame that Bakai couldn't be there. Thridak would have loved to see her daughter again, but she was wrapped up in important work. She paused just outside the ground car, waving her graspers at the crowd as Ishtar climbed out after her. Almost 50 of her subjects stood, some holding signs with personalized messages celebrating her arrival, while others had placards with silhouette of the Dutch Tal and human and Pentrax unity sculpture. Years ago, she had declared its official symbol of the Empire, a decision her people took to with great gusto. Thridak began walking towards the factory, waving constantly to well-wishers. Suddenly, a grasper pushed her to the side, throwing Thridak to the ground. "Gun!" Ishtal screamed, her sharp voice silencing everyone. Time seemed to slow as Thridak hit the concrete, her scales barely holding up, her bulk skidded across the smooth, hard surface. Then she heard the gunshots. Before her horrified eyes, Ishtal jerked, her armored vest taking 2 shots from the crowd before a third caught her in the side of the head, dropping Ishtal's lifeless corpse to the ground. Instantly, Thridak knew those shots had been meant for her. Without Ishtal's quick reflexes, she would be dead on the pavement rather than merely nursing a bruised, scraped scales. The crowd began fleeing almost immediately, leaving 2 Dutchtal standing defiantly, one holding a military revolver and the other carrying one of the blasting charges frequently used in Susk's mines. Bowell's handgun barked back, causing the gun-wielding Dutchtal to hiss in pain and drop her gun while trying to reload the firearm. Then the ground car fired, its cannon almost cutting the other Dutchtal in half before the blasting charge exploded, stealing the breath from Threedak's lungs and throwing Bowell to the ground. Luckily, the terrorists hadn't been close enough to cause any serious damage, but the force of the explosion left a crater in the parking lot that shattered many of the factory's windows. Threedak climbed to her feet with Bowell's help, her guard using one arm to steady the queen while training her handgun on the stunned Dutchtal she'd injured earlier. "My queen!" Bowell slurred, her eyes foggy and possibly concussed according to the whispers of Wang Xinyu. "Get back to the ground car. We need to leave as soon as possible. We have no idea if the rebels have reinforcements." "No." Threedak shook off the grasper and her shoulder. "Before we go, I need to know why. That survivor will answer that question, either in life or in death." Bowell stared at her blankly, struggling to process Threedak's words as she looked at his still body. Threedak felt remorse, both that Ishtal had died and that she had never given to know her granddaughters better. But she had exchanged pleasantries with the skinny Dutchtal more times than she could count, but she never really remembered asking her about herself, where she lived, how many young ones she had whelped, what her hobbies were. Threedak couldn't answer any of those questions. Estelle was basically a stranger, and despite that she had died for her. Threedak walked over to the stunned and injured Dutchtal and reached out, picking up the abused revolver and a handful of shells. Bowell trailed behind her, perplexed but trying to support her queen. Threedak slid 2 rounds into the revolver with practiced ease and drew back the hammer. The Dutchtal on the ground looked up at her, confusion evident in her pain-addled eyes. Without hesitating, Threedak aimed and pulled the trigger, blowing a hole through the enemy's graspers. The Dutchtal hissed in pain as Threedak shifted her aim and pulled the trigger once again, ruining the other grasper. She tossed the weapon aside casually and slid down to all 6 so that her muzzle could be close to her foe. "Why?" she hissed, her exposed fangs less than a foot from the terrorist's neck. "I've given everything for my people over my entire life and asked for little in return. So ask again, why would you do such a thing?" "Tyrant!" the injured Dutchtal spat back, black flecking her maw. "You and your line rule over us all. You create wonders and go back to your mansions. You live every day content, proud, and full. What about the rest of us? We're dying in the mines of Sask, hungry after long days working in the fields, or crushed by poorly secured machinery in the factories that keep you fat and full of eggs." "All jobs are meritocratic," Threedak replied, punching reflexes with warning baritone entered her voice. "I've made sure of that. If you don't want to work in a factory, learn another trade. No one will stop you from bettering yourself." "No one?" The terrorist laughed, a terrible gargling sound betraying a collapsed lung. "How can those of us that were conquered compete with the daughters in a meritocracy? Our mothers pass on to us what skills they can, but none of us have access to human memories. At best, we awaken knowing how to do the same menial skills that trapped our mothers. Your meritocracy and sentiments are worth less than nothing," she spat, as a great gob of blood and saliva that splashed over the side of Threedak's muzzle. "You've created a system that's only fair for you and yours, and we reject it. One of your great-granddaughters got drunk and told us the truth about the great human named Karl Marx. He taught us that you do the oppressors like you. This time we might have failed, but soon Dutchtal the world over will rise up. After all, we have nothing to lose but our chains." Without responding, Threedak leaned forward and ripped out the Dutchtal's throat, chewing slowly. She sifted through the victim's memories. Truly, the rebels were idiots, not even organizing themselves into cells or using fake names. 3 bites later, all Threedak had access to all of their secrets, names, locations, supplies, sympathizers, everything. What a fool, she spoke sadly, looking down at the new still revolutionary. She hadn't even had it that bad. As far as Thirg could tell, her only real complaint was that she had to work for approximately half of each day at her job, as opposed to 1/3 of a day her compatriots were set to demand. Come, Bohal. Thirg turned and walked back to the ground car. I need to get in touch with your mother. We have a revolution to crush. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you enjoyed the story, please follow the link down below and let the author know. If you wish to support this channel, you can do all the usual YouTube gumph, like subscribing, following, and, more importantly, sharing. All of these things do help the channel grow. If you wish to do more, there are links for donations, Patreon, and channel memberships as well. And until the next time, I hope that you all have a wonderful one. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.